Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today, January 4th, 2022. We want to speak with you today about something that you're seeing in the news and have been seeing on and off for the last month. A very important issue about what happened 1 year ago. That's the January 6th Capitol riot, or as some in the news media would like you to believe, the insurrection, something that we are seeing being discussed in Congress and many Democrats are promoting at this time. Now, we want to look at this from a very different point of view, something that is not being discussed in the regular media. We want to address the consequences of what's going on, the unlimited amount of money that is going to be spent to convince you what is being said is an attack on democracy and one of the worst events to ever happen in the United States, if you believe some politicians. But before we get started, we do want to mention, if this is the first time that you are seeing the channel, we want to welcome you and thank you for being part of our growing audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to hear your voice, to be able to hear your tweets, your chats, and yes, your phone calls from anywhere in the world to tell us what you think about the issues that are affecting us all, many times globally. Because we believe in your right to free speech, an unalienable right by birth, regardless of whether your government agrees, regardless of whether the internet overlords agree. We believe in your right to free speech, and we hope that you will help exercise that with us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time from anywhere in the world. With that said, let's address the concept of the question that's going on right now. And that question is, January 6th, was it an insurrection? Was it a riot? That's a big question. It's a question that has remained for many American people, regardless of what you think of the outcome of the prior election. We're not going to discuss that today. What we are going to discuss are what are the consequences that we are seeing from both legislation and emotional manipulation that is ongoing, and how will it affect not only the United States, but the rest of the world. To truly understand this, we have to understand what happened in 9/11. Why is it that there are certain members of government that are trying to turn the insurrection, the so-called insurrection of January 6th of 2021 into a 9/11 event? Now, some of the viewers may not have been alive at the time in September 11th of 2001. I was. And I was in New York when this happened. But for those who were not, on September 11th, 2001, 2,977 Americans were killed because of a terrorist attack. There are 25,000 Americans at this time that have suffered injuries on top of those that passed away. Many of these individuals are suffering from cancer in relation to both the damage and destruction of the Twin Towers and the attempts to rescue as many people as possible. But that wasn't the only consequences of 9/11. In fact, part of the consequences of 9/11 were the legislation that was passed, including the FISA courts. For those who are not familiar with that, the FISA courts are a secret court that takes place in the United States. It's a set of rules and legislation that allows American citizens to be spied on by the United States government without a warrant. It seeks out terrorism, both domestic and internationally, and it commits courts that are held in secret without any knowledge of the public. It's a big question about the Fourth Amendment, the Constitution, and the rights of individuals in a democracy. You may or may not agree about these things, but that's what it is. And we know that the FISA courts do have what is called FISA Section 702. This allows for the surveillance of American citizens without a warrant and without notification. That is a fact. And in fact, there was a case January 3rd, the 10th Circuit Court joining the 2nd Circuit Court and the 9th Circuit Court have decided that warrantless 702 surveillance of communications involving a person in the United States does not violate the Fourth Amendment. It's amazing that we have come to the point, because of 9/11, because of the fear of terrorism, because of the absolute worst event that happened on American soil, we've given into our fears. We have sacrificed our freedoms for the hope of security. That is a fact. It's indisputable. That being said, those results have consequences, not just on our Fourth Amendment rights, but this allowed social media companies and the internet overlords to use these fears to be able to surveil the American citizens and to restrict their freedom of speech. In fact, we had talked about this back in January 26th of 2019, when we actually caught Facebook using its background permissions that are deeply embedded in the user agreement in Facebook, that allowed them to go in and to turn on our cameras and our microphones without our knowledge and without prior notification to just listen to what we were doing. And we presented that information to you. Yes, Facebook is spying on you. One of the questions that should be asked is Facebook and or any other social media internet overlord doing this because of the company itself, or is this on the direction of the United States government, say a FISA court? Now, this is a serious question because for channels like ours, where we deal with political commentary, and quite honestly, as a conservative Republican, in opposition to many of the ideas of progressives, is this happening because the government, either through the NSA or the FISA courts, are they surveilling us because they politically disagree with our point of view? That's a question that we have never received an answer for, and we likely never will. But the fact is that this is happening, and this is a direct result of the Patriot Act and the FISA courts and the increase in surveillance and denial of the First Amendment and free speech. That has also led to the growth of groups like BLM and Antifa. And we see that Antifa, since 2019, we have been speaking about this actually since 2016, we've seen that the fringe left have increased in their actions, their violence, over and over again. What we saw in 2020 was only the natural result of the violence that we had seen since 2016 and that we spoke about on a regular basis on this channel. And it culminated in 2020 in the violence that killed half a dozen children, over 24 adults, that created $2 billion in damages across this nation and is still affecting this nation with its continued efforts of defunding the police and restricting freedoms of individuals to be able to defend themselves with the Second Amendment. The damage, some would say, could be nearly irreparable. But even as we saw in July of 2020, even as we saw the violence encapsulating this entire country, even as children were dying, we saw members of some political factions, like Representative Jerry Nadler of New York, come out and say, it's just not real. 120 days of protests in Portland. We saw the CHAZ, the autonomous zones in Seattle and Austin and Atlanta, the death of mothers in Indianapolis. None of that was real, according to Representative Jerry Nadler. It just wasn't true. And of course, in allowing these things to happen, in denying the violence that we saw, hearing CNN and MSNBC show us arsons, actual ongoing fires on live TV, and telling us that it's mostly peaceful, nothing to worry about. Well, that led to even more violence, even more racial tensions, and ultimately led to what we saw back on November 24th of 2021. Darrell Brooks, a man who purposefully took his vehicle and ran over innocent bystanders, innocent Americans who were at a Christmas parade, targeting them purely for the color of their skin. That is the consequence of what we have been seeing, of restricting the freedom of speech, restricting what individuals can say, attacking individuals who dare to say something that is not approved by the mainstream media, that is not approved by the democratic and progressive movements. Of course, there has been a result and reaction to this. Many people in America are upset. In fact, in looking over what we have been provided by the Biden-Harris administration, Americans are not happy. If we look at this is polling from Real Clear Politics, we can see that since November, in fact, if we look back in all of polling data, going back to August at least, former President Trump is holding a superior position in approval as opposed to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, of course. And in fact, we're hearing that many of the Democrats and progressives are already planning to abandon Joe Biden in a bid in his presumed re-election bid in 2024. And that many Democrats are talking about trying to replace Kamala Harris before she can take power in 2023. Because we believe, and we have predicted on this channel, that Joe Biden will have the 25th Amendment used against him by Democrats to remove him and to put Kamala Harris in his place because he is doing so poorly. And the American people are responding to that. And Democrats are very much looking to try and preserve their power for the midterm elections in 2022. Now, I know you may be saying now, well, Mike, you've been talking about this for 15 minutes. I don't understand. What does that have to do with January 6th? We're getting to that. But I want you to understand the environment and the consequences. When we see that something dramatic has happened in the United States, the reaction has been something that has cost us freedom, and its consequences have bled over into things that we never have predicted. That politicians reacting in an emotional gut punch, their short-term, short-sighted actions have resulted in negative consequences for Americans that have lasted far longer, decades longer than ever could have been considered. And that's what we're seeing now with January 6th. If you look at recent polling, and this comes from Forbes.com, January 3rd, yesterday, Americans still blame, some Americans, it should say, blame former President Trump for an insurrection. We're going to question that in just a second. And they think that democracy is under control. So what are the polls actually saying? Well, 32% of respondents to an NPR poll believe that there was an attempted insurrection in America on January 6th of 2021. Although 28% saying it was just a riot far less violent, far less destructive than riots we had seen throughout this entire nation in 2020, far less damaging and destructive than any riot we have ever seen in 2020, whether that be in New York City, Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, in Austin, or anywhere. Just pick a city. The devastation in each of those cities was far, far worse, both in terms of dollars and death and destruction. What are these polls telling us? America is divided, and it is divided very much along political lines, political preferences. And when you skew and look at the more left-leaning sources of traditional news media and many of the more regimented and edited, censored social media, you tend to get a result that is telling you this was very bad for America. This was very negative. But when we look at what the general American public is looking at, when we look at it internationally, what we see is there is a far greater division that more and more Americans at times goes by are not seeing this in the way that they are being told to see this, that they do not agree that this was an insurrection and that this was a danger to democracy. And people are preferring more and more the Republican and populist points of view. This, of course, is something that is unacceptable for the Democratic Party. They are looking at landslide losses in 2022 in the midterm elections. They need to get a popular win. They need to get something that they can rally behind. Build Back Better has already failed. Joe Manchin has destroyed that and has shown the weakness of the Biden-Harris administration. There is the open border in our southern border, which has allowed over 1.5 million illegal aliens to enter the United States, many of them with COVID. We have seen that there was a complete abject failure in Afghanistan, where Joe Biden literally and directly lied to American people, telling us there were only 85 Americans that were abandoned in Afghanistan to the tender mercies of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS, only to later, very quietly and far less covered by the news media, to tell the American people that in fact that number is 479 at least, with several sources of independent groups trying to save Americans and to bring them back home that tell us that that number could be in excess of 2,000 Americans that were abandoned by the Biden-Harris administration. We have inflation at 6.8% and a crumbling economy, with over 4 million people having quit their jobs in November alone, and with a future of far higher inflation coming as we see that the value of the dollar is consistently being decreased as more and more money, trillions of dollars, are being spent on programs that actually don't help America, but they do help the political far left, the progressive ideology. So Democrats need to turn this around. They need to change this. That's what's going on with the insurrection. That's with the claims of insurrection, with the view of January 6th. And I thank you for holding on and staying with me as we get to this, but I think it's important that you understand how we get here. What is it that makes it so important for January 6, 2021 to be seen as an insurrection as opposed to a riot? Otherwise, this is bad for the Democratic Party because they have nothing to be able to present the American people going into the 2022 midterms, and their prospects for 2024 are becoming more and more clouded as the leadership of the Biden-Harris administration is questioned by Democrats and progressives alike. They need something to turn the American public against any ideology except their own. And that's why they're looking to spend your tax dollars as much as is necessary to turn the riot into an insurrection. You think I'm kidding about this? Here is Bill H.R. 1627. And in Bill H.R. 1627, which was placed by Representative Crow, and in this bill, it states that a memorial will be created to commemorate the January 6th, quote, insurrection. And they are authorizing, and I want to be very clear here, they are authorized to be appropriated such sums as are necessary to carry out this act. Amounts appropriated pursuant to this subsection shall remain available until expended. They are willing to spend as much money as is necessary to promote an idea that there was an insurrection, that there was a plan to try and take over the American government. They want you to believe this. They must make you believe this. They must make you feel like you felt about the 9/11 attacks. Why are they so dead set to spend as much of your tax dollars as is necessary to create memorabilia and an ideology that will change the way you look at things? There's a word for this. It's called propaganda. Propaganda is the spreading of ideas, information, or rumor for the purpose of helping or injuring an institution or a cause or a person. That doesn't mean it's disinformation. Doesn't mean it's misinformation. It means they are willing to tailor any and all information that you will receive to promote a very specific ideology, that you will get to a conclusion, that you will be emotionally manipulated to agree with something that if you used logic and reasoning, you would not come to. Now, you may say, well, Mike, there's plenty of evidence to say that they're wrong, that there is an insurrection, and that we should memorialize this, that we should remind ourselves that democracy was in danger. Except the FBI has already told us there was no insurrection. An insurrection requires a plot, a plan, an action, leaders. It doesn't exist. The FBI has no evidence of any coordination to try and take over the United States government. The evidence doesn't exist, and they told us this back on August 20th of 2021. The evidence isn't there. It isn't real. But yet, we're being told by the mainstream media, we're being told by politicians, no, it is real. You have to believe it. You must believe this, which therefore makes this propaganda. It's very much like what we were told about the Russia collusion for 3 years. We were told there is evidence, there is proof that there was collusion between former President Trump and Russia to usurp, to change elections in the United States. And after 3 years of investigation, after 3 years of Rachel Maddow and Representative Adam Schiff nightly coming onto the news media and telling the American people there's evidence and this will be a proof of treason, 3 investigations, $30 million later, there's no proof. That entire 3-year period was propaganda. It was meant to manipulate you and to give you an emotional feeling that logic would not support. Fair enough. That's what they decided to do. Okay. So we have to wonder. The FBI has told us that evidence does not exist. Does not exist. But what we do know that happened, and this has been suppressed by social media, is that one person did die. And that is important. Ashley Babbitt, a former member of the United States Air Force, died. And she was the only person to die on January 6th, and the only person to die as a result of the riot on January 6th. She was unarmed, and she was shot by the Capitol Police. These are facts. This is true. There is no question about that. No one else died. But we are told by the news media, well, no, that's not true. Other people died. If you look at CNN, as we were talking about this on our most recent live stream, CNN and other news media sources told us that the ensuing chaos of what happened on January 6, 2021, led to the deaths of multiple people the day of the attack or shortly thereafter. That is a bald-faced lie. There was only one person who died on January 6th. That was Ashley Babbitt. And several of the people who died after that, some died because of natural causes, and some died like a stroke, and some people died because of committing suicide. So again, why is this being done? Why are we being manipulated in this way? Why are we being told things that are not true? Again, I come back to the same thing. Not only is this propaganda, this is about the 2022 midterm election. This is about the 2024 presidential election. You're being manipulated to get an outcome, to be led down the road, and you're being given only one path to follow. If all the major news media, which is left-leaning, as reported by many polls and surveys, they want you to believe that there is a problem in America and that the only solution to that problem must be compliance with the furthest left policies of an ideology most Americans do not have. But Democrats have to win. They need to support their power base. They need to maintain control. And the only way that they can do that is because of putting out bills like H.R. 1627, a bill to create monuments to a false event, something that didn't happen, to try and convince you that this is the truth. Something that we've seen in the former Soviet Union. I know, I've lived in Moscow. I've seen their monuments to socialism, to tell you how great socialism is, when in fact, it was the leading cause of death in the 20th century. I know, I'm a little long-winded here. This takes a few moments, but I want you to see, in transforming the January 6th riot into an event equal to or exceeding 9/11, well, then you get to have the consequences that go along with that. That means you get to create new laws, like the Patriot Act, or like what we're hearing proposed now from senators like Senator Blumenthal, where they want to increase the amount of restrictions on social media to take away your free speech, to take away your ability to say anything that doesn't work in their advantage. Imagine what they will do if they can claim that there was an insurrection, that to have a point of view, to have an opinion separate of the one that certain politicians have is a crime. And then they can use the secret courts and secret investigations of whatever you type to your family and friends, any social media aspects that can be taken out of context, and they can use that against you. Imagine what happens then. I'll ask you a simple question. How many people have been charged? There's over 725 people have been charged with the January 6th riots. Hundreds of them are still in jail for about a year now since January 6th. And there are many, many charges that have been placed against these people. And I ask you a simple question. How many have been charged with insurrection, which is a federal crime? The answer to that is 0. There are 57 different domestic terrorism charges that can be placed against a person in United States law. Let's go to Politico, left-leaning source, which is considered part of the mainstream media. And we know that the Department of Justice is not charging anyone with domestic terrorism. Some judges have publicly debated whether the charges against January 6th defendants qualify as crimes of terrorism. Prosecutors for the Department of Justice have repeatedly pulled back on tougher sentences, citing unspecified facts and circumstances. They're not willing to do it. They won't charge people with this. This is from Politico. This is from the left itself. Under current law, 57 offenses are on the list of what is domestic terrorism, including such crimes as hostage taking, destroying an aircraft, using fire or explosives to destroy a building, and computer hacking that creates a public health or safety threat, or impacts national security systems. Some of the so-called predicated offenses are quite obscure, including producing smallpox viruses or assaulting a Nuclear Regulatory Commission inspector. So the ability to use 57 different charges of domestic terrorism and insurrection as well as treason are on the table. But many of the most frequently filed felony charges related to the Capitol riot, not an insurrection, don't appear on the terrorism list. What they are being charged with is not domestic terrorism. Assaulting a police officer with a dangerous weapon, a potential 20-year felony, isn't on the list. Nor is obstructing an official proceeding, another 20-year felony, or interfering with police during civil disorder, a 5-year felony. They're not on the list. They're not being charged with these things that have been alleged by the mainstream media and many politicians, often incorrectly. About 45 Capitol riot defendants are charged with a crime that is on the terrorism list: destruction of federal property, which carries a 10-year maximum prep. So the only thing that the left can point to try and preserve this claim of insurrection is to say that, well, they destroyed property, federal property, and therefore that's an insurrection. Which means, and I don't want to play what about, but that also means that if that is the case, if that is the defining thing, that some people destroyed property during the January 6th Capitol riot, breaking windows, breaking some doors, if that qualifies, then the $2 billion of damages, actually more than $2 billion, that we have seen in Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, New York City, Austin, Boulder, all across this nation, well, those were all insurrections too. That we have hundreds of cases of insurrection that have occurred at autonomous zones and BLM and Antifa and Progressive Leader of Tomorrow plot riots throughout this nation. So why aren't we seeing our courts flooded with insurrections, with cases about insurrection because federal property was destroyed, and therefore that is a domestic terrorism charge, and therefore these individuals should be charged with that. But we're being told by prosecutors, well, that's not really. Just because you tried to burn down a federal building, that doesn't mean it's domestic terrorism. But breaking a window is. Does that make sense to you? Or does it sound like you're supposed to be emotionally manipulated? Because the news media told you that when other buildings in Seattle, in Philadelphia, when they were being destroyed, when we saw protesters trying to throw Molotov cocktails and to burn down these buildings, we were told that was mostly peaceful. But now we're being told that breaking windows and breaking a couple of doors at the Capitol, well, that's mostly violent. So I have to sit here and I have to ask you, as you're going to be watching over the next week, and you're going to be told over and over, this was an insurrection. We have to have memorials, that we are going to spend unlimited amounts of money, besides the January 6th commission that is going on right now, that is doing an investigation just like they did for Russia collusion, spending tens of millions of dollars, taking months, if not years of time to come to a conclusion that there is no evidence for. And we spend unlimited amounts of money, according to HR 1627, unlimited amounts of money to create statues to something that didn't happen, an insurrection, something that no one has been charged for, that prosecutors refuse to actually charge someone with. You have to ask, why? And the answer comes down to, again, it's politics. It's about making you so emotionally upset that you will vote in a very specific manner, which is, again, the definition of propaganda. America is a very unique country. We have people from everywhere in the world. We have political ideologies from everywhere in the world. And we live mostly and comparatively to anywhere else in the world in harmony. And that's because we have democracy. And that's why we are the shining beacon of freedom in the world. That is a fact. It's not a question. It's not an opinion. It is a demonstrative and absolute fact. And if we fall into the darkness of claiming that certain political riots are insurrections, if we demonize people in our nation so that others can have political benefits, democracy dims. Freedom dims. The consequences are that it will not stop here. If we allow H.R. 1627 to go forward, if we allow Democrats to promote this idea of insurrection that doesn't exist, that we have seen the FBI prove doesn't exist, that prosecutors will not charge anyone with, if they continue to promote this because the news media will allow it to be promoted, then we will get laws like the Patriot Act, laws about domestic terrorism and what can and cannot be said that will restrict your freedom of speech, that will enable the government to attack you and to punish you for the non-crime of having a thought that isn't approved. And if the United States makes that leap, there is no other nation in the world that will pick up the beacon of freedom. In fact, they will go the exact opposite way. If we are the example of how much freedom can be had in the world, and we are restricting that, we are decreasing the net amount of freedom that the American people can have, then the net amount of freedom in places that won't give as much freedom as the United States, well, that will decrease as well. The world will take a step closer to darkness. Over the next week, as you hear the mainstream media and many Democrats come out and say this was an insurrection, we have proof that the evidence is that someone sent a tweet to the president and said, please tell people to go home, which he did. And that's proof that there was a crime, that they're going to investigate people because they were scheduled to be speaking at a rally separate of anything else, and they didn't speak, and they're being investigated anyway. As they continue to tell you that there was so many deaths, that this was one of the most violent things that has ever happened in America, as they ignore the billions in riots that had happened previously. The division in America will continue to grow. And the danger to democracy will be even more real. You may not agree with us. You may not agree with the sources that we have provided. You may think, well, no, this was as dangerous as possible. We ask you only this. What's your evidence? If you disagree with us, tell us. We want to have that conversation, not to pick on you, not to insult you, but to ask you, why do you think this will be better for America by decreasing our freedoms and using our emotions to manipulate us and to use propaganda to tell us and sell us things that aren't true? And this is all going to be paid for with our tax dollars as inflation continues to go up, and we have an administration that even Democrats themselves do not believe in. We look forward to hearing your thoughts about this. And if you have found this to be interesting or informative, we hope to see you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in our live stream to speak about this and many other issues. We thank you, and we hope you have a great day.